Over the past few months, I've been tracking a single mature buck number 52. This is a story about how hunting pressure, drought, food scarcity, and post-rut behavior can completely rewrite a buck's movements, sometimes overnight. Buck number 52 is frequent in this general area pretty much all season long, and even though he's buck number 52, he's not a new visitor. We've had this buck on trail camera probably since he was around 2 years old, and that makes it to where this season he's either 6 or maybe 7 years old. In the past, he's always lived in the same general core area as well. With the drone, I was able to track him all the way throughout season, all the way back until early September. And probably my favorite part about the entire story is what takes place whenever the hunters are introduced come mid-November. But before I get into that, I have to give some background as to what this property was like last season and why I think that he wasn't here, and what the property is like this season and why I think he's back. If you watch my past videos, you'll know that in 2024, this property had a really good acorn mast. And because of that, I think that it was met by new mature bucks that hadn't previously been on the property, which in turn is why I think the 6x6 was pushed out. Because in the past, we've always had him all season long. And last season we had him in the summertime, and then he just up and vanished. For the 2025 season though, my area was hit by a really harsh drought. I think it was around 3 or 4 months or something like that. And all the while, we were trying to monitor acorn production that was taking place. And we noticed pretty early on that not only were there significantly less overall acorns on the trees, but they were dropping weeks in advance from whenever they were supposed to. And this is likely because the trees were trying to protect themselves, because they weren't getting enough nutrients and resources needed to retain their fruit, but that's an entire other video in itself. The lack of acorns and struggling native forb species led me to take food plots a little bit more seriously this year. RTP Outdoors graciously partnered with me to ensure that my research efforts could be maximized this season, and I'm really thankful that they did. We noticed some rain coming up in the future forecast for around Labor Day, so we full court pressed everything and went ahead and planted almost all of the seeds that we had with the drill. I saved some of the seeds back so that way I could broadcast some smaller food plots, just as kind of a baseline as to what I used to do in the past. That way I could see the drill's potential effectiveness. And in typical Missouri fashion, it didn't rain for 3 more weeks. The smaller food plots that I had broadcasted, they were trying to come up somewhat, but at a certain point I was essentially baiting turkeys for a short time, and they pretty much disintegrated all of the seeds that I had casted out. While on the other side, the food plots that were drilled, while they were bigger, the seeds were still being protected because they were covered up by the soil. And in return, we have food plots, even though we didn't have rain for 3 weeks after planting. So with that background going into 2025, knowing that we didn't really have any acorns, the native forbs, the native grasses weren't performing too well, and overall we actually have some pretty decent food plots going into season. Let's get into the next part where we look at buck number 52's documented movements from around September 15th to around October 20th. I'll pull a map up here, and I'm going to kind of ask that you ignore the chaos that's happening for the most part. These are all of the movements that had taken place from September 15th to October 20th that I have documented. Everything can be a little bit overwhelming to look at initially, but to better understand this deer, let's focus on one of his more typical routes of travel with an average baseline of statistics all the way across the board. This track took place on October 16th, and in the morning he walks a semi-straight line out of his bed through this thin stretch of timber and decides to move down into this old clear cut along the north side of this habitat edge, and then beds back down around 9:25 a.m. And at this time, does were starting to begin entering estrus, so he did scent check around 15 to 20 does all along this path. At 2:15 p.m., he has a doe move past him and starts piquing his interest. He gets up and follows her down into this thermal hub. Around 30 minutes later, she decides to move out of the thermal hub and back up towards this food plot and browses in it for the rest of the evening. Naturally, he follows her and stays within 5 to 15 yards of her the entire time. And while he walked into the food plot, I was able to get this really cool shot where he's standing like 5 yards behind a trail camera, and we never got a picture of this. It's just kind of fascinating to see that like he's obviously not avoiding the trail camera in any way. It just so happens that he walked right next to it and we didn't get a picture of it, which that would have been pretty important intel, being that there were hardly any pictures in mid-October of this buck on the property at all. Now, let's fast forward to the last time that I saw this buck this season, and then I'll come back and I'll try to fill in the blanks and explain what got us to this point, this random extreme movement pattern that he did. And I'll preface, this is the most boring day of pretty much any of the tracks that I've ever done, but it might just be one of the most interesting as well. On this day, I decided to try and attempt to get within bow range of him with my camera. It's a pretty cool video idea that I've had for quite a while now, and I've attempted it a couple times with pretty decent success. I went in early that morning and drove myself up to right around here. I slowly stalked my way into my stand location, located at a pine tree right about here, and climbed up into my saddle to wait for him. Once I was set up, I checked the time and it was around 6:05 a.m. The wind was coming out of the northeast at around 10 to 12 miles per hour, and based on my drone intel, I was predicting him to be bedded or just located somewhere right in this general area. I had a friend with me that day, and he piloted the drone to locate the 6x6 and track him for the entire day. He first located him just as light came up around 6:45 a.m. He was bedded with a doe somewhat nearby, stood out of his bed around 6:55 a.m., and slowly moved off to the southwest corner of this little food plot. He entered the food plot and began browsing around really slowly and not like he had much of a care in the world. Time went by, and at around 11 a.m., I checked in on the 6x6's location. Again, same thing. He was still in the food plot. He technically was almost directly downwind of me while browsing, and as bad as I wanted him to wrap down into the clear-cut edge and back up to me on this side, there was a chance that he would walk right on top of the ridge directly at me, and in turn, I would have bumped him. So I decided to get down and see if by me leaving would have any effect on him for the rest of the day. Along the way, while I was getting down and walking back to the truck, he was perfectly calm and never acted alarmed in any way as I left the area. From there, we kept tabs on him throughout the day, and you guessed it, he was in the food plot. All day long. A little after 5 p.m., he decided to walk off to the edge of the food plot, and he bedded back down. The only thing that initially made sense was that it was taking place during the post-rut. So in that essence, he should be trying to recover and recoup all the energy that is expelled during the rut. But at the same time, to be browsing in a food plot all day long, I've never recorded an event like that before. So to try to understand this and figure out what he was doing that day, now we're going to go back to late October and look at the hunting pressure that started to slowly increase leading into the middle of November. Naturally, to do this, I'm going to pull back up a map and start articulating on it so that way we can see their entry and exit routes and their exact stand locations that they were hunting. And one thing worth noting before I introduce all the hunters onto the map is that, from my understanding, nobody saw the 6x6 all season long while hunting. The first bow hunters really started moving in during late October, and that number kind of slowly increased leading up to November 15th. For Missouri, November 15th marks the rifle season opener, publicly known as deer season. During rifle season, everyone was making reasonable decisions, and there were plenty of hunters, which in turn limited available spots. First, you'll notice that where a lot of these hunters are sitting, they're in open fields. That's for a reason, and a pretty decent one at that. There are towers with good visibility in those areas, and they're over high-quality food plots in an environment with minimal native browse. So in turn, it does make sense that does are going to be congregating to these food sources, and mature bucks that are seeking them out will potentially walk into the open. But in the end, wind direction, time of day, and entry and exit were not really the main priority in most of these strategies, which in turn makes for a very volatile environment. Couple that with all the increased UTV noise and human scent and just general pressure overall to the property, and in return, most of the mature bucks were rarely even seen by human eyes, especially the 6x6, or he would be dead. So here's kind of the shift that the 6x6 was making while the introduction of new hunters into the area was taking place. To kind of remind you of his initial core area, here it is before the introduction of hunters, and here are all of his travel routes that I documented during human pressure and after, all the way until December 4th. Like stated before, every once in a while in early November, he would move a little bit further to the east, but especially leading into rifle season, he generally kept within this range. The very first bow hunter that moved into this area unknowingly gave the 6x6 their wind. And even though whenever it happened, he didn't move away or flee in any direction at that time, I believe it was the start of his habits changing. As more hunters began pouring into these areas, he started relocating to this large clear cut for around 10 days during the rifle season. And what this location has to offer him is a large clear cut that does have some native browse in it, even if it's not that digestible. There is a pond here on the habitat edge, and there's also a pond down here a little bit to the south secluded in the timber. And as you guys know from a little bit ago, this is a tiny food plot. And then on the north side of his core area, there's another decent sized food plot around an acre or so. As the rifle season went on and it was slowly coming to an end, one day I was driving around the property to move a stand at around 1 p.m. and I caught him off guard. He was locked onto a doe right here in the bottom corner of this food plot. Early on, he continued being locked on with a doe, but even after moving on from her, he stayed in the area and would pop out in this little corner or bump over to the food plot to the south. There was never really a rhyme or reason as to why he was in one over the other. He was just making pretty random, hardly predictable movements. As I kept researching him, I was starting to realize that he was in these same two locations every single day, so I decided to try and video him as stated in the story previously. And on that morning, he was bedded in a slightly new location for him. He browsed in one of the two food plots all day long, and then bedded back down. And while I was there, it appeared that there were no sounds that were alarmed by him. And I had deer around me all morning long while I was in the saddle, and some of them even got downwind of me, and none of them blew out. So essentially, in my opinion, his behavior that he displayed in the food plot would have taken place had I been there or not. But the next morning, whenever I came back and flew, he was gone. That was December 4th. The day I'm recording this is December 23rd, and I still haven't found him. So this is where my research starts to introduce a touch of human interpretation, which is not uncommon. But had this deer been collared, I would know exactly where he is. Maybe he got hit by a car or killed by a neighboring hunter, or maybe he's just a mobile buck and I didn't realize it. There's a chance he moved a few miles away and is settling into a new late season zone for him. But since we're down to human interpretation, here's what I think. Really, my main questions are, why did he move back in the first place? Why did he browse all day long in a food plot? And the last one, why did he leave? First, why did he move back? Because last season, he wasn't here in any capacity. And because he's been a core buck for years while growing up, I think it was because of those new mature bucks that were living on the property during a high acorn mast season. So thanks to the 2024 season, that shows that he does have another core area that he's very comfortable living in. But ultimately, he did move back, and I think that it's literally just because he wanted to come back home. As for why he browsed in a food plot all day long and then just up and vanished, food going into this winter was really sparse. Because of that, man-made food sources are going to be meeting a much larger share of the deer's nutritional need. Mature timber with zero acorn production in a drought season happens to not be the most valuable for deer. And then, in comparison to bucks, does don't have that same drive to survive, I'll call it. Their main focus pretty much stays the same all the way throughout season. Food almost always comes first, shelter, and then sometimes they care about security. This in turn allows them to live out in secluded native fields, positioning themselves literally in a food source, or they'll likely bed within 10 to 150 yards of their destination feeding zone. Whereas last season, they had their best food source back in the timber. This season, they're being forced out in the open more often. And being that in my area, a lot of these native grass fields and man-made food sources are also pretty sparse, that means doe groups are going to be significantly more spread out across the landscape. This will force dominant bucks to make daylight appearances out in the open more frequently. But the biggest thing for this story is that it forces them to make longer hops between doe group to check in on who is potentially entering estrus. This is much more taxing than a normal rut, and he's not really being rewarded with high-quality browse in return for his efforts. And I think that's why the 6x6 was gorging up before he disappeared. To me, it looks like he was packing his bags and kind of gearing up and preparing for this predetermined journey that was ahead of him. And if my theory is true that he was packing his bags, this continues to show a clear sign of intelligence for whitetail deer and show their capabilities for thinking out day-to-day actions. So on one coin, yes, they are wild animals, but from what I've seen, their day-to-day decisions often suggest a level of awareness and intent that is pretty easy to underestimate. So that's what I believe happened to him. I think that he knew he was leaving the area, so he went ahead and prepared for his trip. Then he settled down before the challenges ahead of him and vanished into the night. Hey guys, I really enjoyed making that video, and it was definitely fun to get to track the 6x6 for as long as I did and kind of develop that relationship and then just have it all end all at once and come up with a story as to what I think happened based off of it. It is pretty fascinating. I know that it's been a little while since I kicked a video out, and that's for pretty good reason. I'm doing a lot of research and documenting stuff into spreadsheets and then, in order to be doing research, I have to actually be flying the drone. That's kind of one of the things that I said in the first video I ever made. It's kind of the the Achilles heel of my research is that if you don't have the drone in the sky, you're not actually doing anything. So if I'm sitting in an office and I'm editing a video, I'm not doing any research, and it makes it pretty difficult. So with that being said, once the deer season kind of comes to an end, I'd like to think that video production is going to slowly increase in frequency. And I just kind of wanted to stop in and say that first part and just let people know why I'm not making videos so frequently. I'm a team of one, and my main focus is research, not making videos. Obviously, I have to make videos in order to make a living, blah, blah, blah. But yes, that's my main focus is still research. That's the number one thing I'm doing. And I'll say if you guys want to support me, then like, comment, subscribe, share, all of those things. I also do have a Patreon. I post kind of behind the scenes content on there and a little bit more raw footage style things that might make it onto Patreon versus YouTube, because YouTube, I feel like I need to polish everything really well before going ahead and posting it, whereas Patreon, I feel like I have more liberty to just kind of throw it out there because those people won't judge me as much, I guess. But yeah, anyways, that's an option if you want to support me and just see more content that I'm creating over on Patreon. But yeah, I think that's everything. So thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.